Hi, my name's Alison Waring. I'm a writer and performer, and I specialize in memoir writing, both in my own work and in my teaching. I teach a lot of memoir writing workshops. And one of the things that I am facing right now, or receiving right now, are a lot of emails from people who are in some kind of isolation or lockdown experience and longing to make this time meaningful or productive or both. And there are only so many writing workshops that I can conduct, and they're all full now. So I thought I would respond to people by opening just a simple video that might help a few people get started or maybe further along a project that's already underway. So one of the most common questions that I get asked, well, actually, I should say, at the beginning of most of the workshops that I do in person, or actually even online, people go around the table or around the screen, as the case may be, and almost inevitably people apologize. I'm sorry, my life hasn't been as interesting as everyone else. My writing's probably not as good as everyone else's. I don't actually think I have much of a story to tell, etc., etc. And it's gotten to the point now where we have created a rule where you just simply read your work and no apology. You have to sort of toss in a nickel if you accidentally apologize. We just have that instinct. I don't know whether it's some kind of self-effacing we feel we need to do because we don't feel that our story matters. We don't feel that our story is good enough or that we're good enough to do this. So one of the things I would love to just offer is the truth about that, which is that every story matters. Your story matters. It has value simply because you lived it. In the same way that every life has value, every story has value. But what do we do with it? That's the key. I think a lot of people also feel that memoir writing is, a narcissistic pursuit, and it's so self-indulgent for me to want to talk about myself or write about my own story. But in fact, when it's done well, memoir is the opposite. It ideally is a generous offering to the world that's not actually navel-gazing, but the opposite. It points the reader up into a sort of universal experience that may reflect back on their own life, that helps them come to a certain understanding about an aspect of life or some sort of universal experience, such as grief or aging or betrayal or love or sexual awakening or whatever it is. There are so many experiences that we share as human beings. And one of the great paradoxes of memoir writing is that we write from personal experience, but in order for that personal experience to have meaning for someone other than us, we must actually use that personal experience as an illustration of something greater. So our little story, our little navel-gazing story, if it appears that way, is just the starting point. It's actually just the lens through which we look up at a greater experience. And so that can be helpful for people starting out when they feel crippled by a sense both of their own insecurity or the value of their story, but also, why should this matter? What's the point of doing this? And the point is that we are connected by story. We as human beings have always connected through story. I mean, we've been, as long as there have been kitchen tables, we've been gathering around them, sharing the stories of our lives. And at a time like this, perhaps it's even more valuable to do this sort of thing, to tell our story in such a way that it facilitates connection. And so one of the other questions I get asked is, what's the difference between, say, journal writing and memoir writing, personal writing and memoir writing? And in fact, there's a great difference. One is the starting point for the other, but it's just the starting point. And one of the things that we do in workshops over time is look at not just what happened in the story. So we all have stories from our lives that are meaningful to us, often because they were real challenges that forced us to become bigger people, stronger people, that forced us to plumb the depths of ourselves, that forced us to step into a greater version of ourselves, that forced a certain wisdom upon us, sometimes prematurely, or that, that took us to the very edge of ourselves, and only there did we find what we were made of. Often the stories that we write about are not the happiest stories in our lives, because those are often not the ones that have shaped us and forged us into the people we are. But rather than just recounting what happened, the quest of memoir is to answer the question, why did what happened matter? Why does it continue to matter? And that's where you look for that big story. That's where you move from a personal story into memoir, from a story that is only interesting to you or the people who were in that experience, to something that is universal, something that a reader anywhere can relate to. So those are a couple of questions that I think maybe stop people just off the block from getting started. And so if that's helpful, I hope it is, in getting you moving, both in validating your own story, but in understanding what's going to shape that story, what's going to take it from it just being a journal entry or something that you tell someone, at a party, guess what happened to me, or at an intimate moment, here's what has made me who I am, and what can shape it into something that becomes a piece of writing, that becomes art, that other people who have never met you before will begin to relate to. And, as a takeaway, as something that you can do right away, one of the things I think that can be helpful is reclaiming the art of letter writing, not email, that's very different, but letter writing, taking the time to take out a piece of paper, get a pen, and compose what you are going to write before you write it. That is a lost art, and I think it is part of what we need to sit down and craft story. This is also the difference between journal writing, which is fantastic, sort of stream of consciousness writing, but then crafting writing, crafting sentences, shaping story. And so we feel a freedom when we're writing a letter to write it with our own voice. And that can be lost sometimes when we sit down to formally write memoir. Now I'm going to write something formal. That can sometimes, be the equivalent of just choking someone's authentic voice. But when we write a letter to someone, well, we can even write it to a former self. That's an exercise that I like to give people. If you could write a letter to yourself at age 18, 20, 22, from the perspective that you have now, knowing what that person is going to live, what would you say?